That's the neighborhood we live in. It's called the neighborhood of hope. But there's another neighborhood in Ottawa, and it's not like this one. And you know this. And I want to tell you about some of the citizens who live in that neighborhood. I want to tell you about Soyana. Soyana is 7 years old, and she was born in a refugee camp in Africa. And she came to this country and to this city with her family. And they live in a neighborhood where 55% of the people who live there are from a visible minority and live at the poverty line or below the poverty line. And Soyana is one of the 40% of food bank users who are children. Think of that in the city of this affluence. 40% of food bank users are children. And right now, Soyana is sitting in one of my schools and she's getting breakfast. Not the breakfast you got. She's getting a banana or a bowl of cereal or a piece of toast. Not all three, and a glass of juice. Soyana lives in a neighborhood called Fear. I want to tell you about Natalie. Natalie's mom and dad divorced when she was 7. And mom's new partner emotionally abused Natalie. And around the age of 12 years old, Natalie was sexually assaulted by her brother's best friend. And because Natalie had been drinking at 12, no one believed her. And by the age of 14, Natalie had turned to drugs and Natalie had turned to prostitution. Natalie's now 18 years old, and she lives in a neighborhood not called hope, but a neighborhood called despair. And Natalie needs to try and save her life, and we need to help Natalie. And I want to tell you about Joan. Colleen told you about the Shepherds of Good Hope, and when I was taking the first tour there, some of the clients have rooms, and I went into one room and there was cheap stuffed toys all over the wall. And I said, whose room is this? And they said, this is Joan's room. And I met Joan, and Joan had stuffed toys down the front of her blouse. And I found out that Joan was like you and me until one day she was driving her car with her husband and 2 children, and she caused an accident and they were all killed. And she slipped over that edge from mental health to mental illness. And that separation is about as thin as that piece of paper for any of us. And Joan likes it when my students come to her, to the Shepherds, because she's looking for her children and she has the toys ready to give them. Joan lives in the neighborhood of despair. And I think of Susan. When I was a vice principal, I met with Susan one day and her son, whom I just suspended from school. And I looked into the eyes of a woman who clearly had a lot of makeup on, covering the bruises, the livid bruises around her eyes. And I looked at the bruises on her arms and the bruises on her legs. And I said to her, you need help. Can I help you? And it will haunt me to my dying day. She said to me, nobody can help me. Susan lives in the neighborhood called despair. And lastly, I want to tell you about Jim. Jim's a 72-year-old Japanese Canadian who lives in our city. When he was a child, he was in a prisoner, a camp, an internment camp in British Columbia. And Jim is still in prison. Jim has aphasia and other challenges, and several years ago he had a stroke and he doesn't speak very well, and he looks as though he's drunk. And a close friend sold his house from underneath him and cleaned out his bank account, and people avoid Jim because they think he's drunk. Jim lives in the neighborhood of despair. I don't tell you this to bring you down, because that's not the message today. Helen Keller once said, there's a lot of suffering in the world, but there's also a lot of the overcoming of suffering in the world. And that's what we're here about today. We're here to rediscover community. We've been through a recession in this country, and as I said, most of us escaped relatively unscathed, but you haven't if you don't have a job, if you're facing the abyss of sexual abuse or spousal abuse or mental illness or any of the other things I've mentioned and the people I've talked about this morning. And our culture bombards us with the cult of the individual, where we're told to look after number one. I'm worth it. Buy this for yourself. Be a winner. Compete. Don't cooperate. You reject that culture. That's why you're sitting here today. We believe in the power of we, not me. We're here today because we want to make a difference in our community. And I'm asking you this morning, we're asking you this morning at United Way to rediscover community. To rediscover the city from the perspective of the people who live in the neighborhood of despair. All that's good about us as a community and the energy we can harness and all of the good potential that we can realize. We're here to rediscover today that hunger you feel in your heart and my heart to make a difference and not to stand by quietly and let this happen. We're here today to rediscover that United Way is not called United Way for nothing. That United Way is the place. This campaign is the time when we can celebrate community at its most fundamental way in our city. And I want to leave you this morning with a question, with a challenge. You've heard Mike speak about the Speaker's Corner, and you can go online and use this too. I want to ask you the question, what do you want your community to be? And over the next 10 weeks, I want you to tell me and tell each other, what do you want your community to be? I want my community to be a place where Soyana and Natalie and Joan and Susan and Jim get the help, get the resources that they need so that they can move from the neighborhood of despair to the neighborhood of hope. What do you want your community to be? George.
I want my community to be a place where everyone has a shoulder to lean on and no one is left alone.
Thank you, George. Rasha.
I want a community where everyone feels included and good about themselves.
Thank you, Rasha. Valerie.
Je veux une communauté où les jeunes peuvent apprendre et grandir dans un milieu sécuritaire et chaleureux.
Mercy. Kevin.
I want a community where everyone is treated equally and where they can find help needed.
Thank you, Kevin. Now you can all breathe a sigh of relief. Being a teacher, I noticed the panic in your eyes as I left the stage. Being a teacher, I realized the faces of panic saying, "Don't pick me, I don't know the answer." And those who wouldn't look at me, I did it for years. People avoiding looking at me. You're off the hook right now, but the assignment is coming. The homework assignment is, what do you want from your community? And over the next 10 weeks when I see you at various launches and functions, I'll be asking you, what do you want for your community? If you want to get off the hook, get on the Speaker's Bureau and do it before I ask you. But seriously, I want you to consider, what do you want for your community? Because we've heard from some important men in our city today. They know what they want for our community, but your word is important too. My word is important too. And I want to challenge you this morning to join with us to rediscover community and be a part of building a healthier, stronger, safer community for all the people who live in the neighborhood of despair. Thank you very much for coming. God bless.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line at 613-759-8622 or email us your comments.